Through the chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Lynda Lukasik. I'm the director of the Office of Climate Change Initiatives, as you already heard, and I'm here today with project manager Beatrice EkwaEkoko to provide this presentation to you. And as you already heard, the office was asked by Director Sheikh to prepare this report in response to Carnegie Hamilton's LRT on the Right Track, a report on findings and recommendations for Hamilton's light rail transit project from a climate justice lens, with the idea of reporting back to all of you on the subcommittee respecting which recommendations the city is acting on and if there are additional recommendations for the light rail subcommittee to consider. So in addition, I just want to share with you that our office felt it made sense to use this report really as an opportunity to begin to share with all of you the work that we're doing in the Office of Climate Change Initiatives to develop a climate justice framework for the City of Hamilton. And that framework is really intended to guide municipal efforts to implement climate mitigation and adaptation actions that are set out in Hamilton's Climate Action Strategy. Beatrice is going to share more about this piece as she is leading this effort as part of our team. But I'll note here that climate justice really depends not just on final outcomes, but on an inclusive process that engages impacted communities in determining pathways forward. This is really important. And I also just want to emphasize, too, that our effort to develop a climate justice framework is in its very early stages. And I think it's fair to say that most municipalities across the country are just starting to figure out what steps need to be taken to effectively integrate climate justice into the work that they do at the municipal level to guide climate action in a meaningful way. And again, more on that emerging framework in a moment. So I just want to speak quickly at the outset to those recommendations, and you'll see in the report that we did take a look at each one of them and provided some information just to give a sense of efforts that are already underway within the municipality on some of those pieces. Just want to highlight a few of them, and then we'll get into talking about that climate justice framework and its applicability to LRT work. One of the requests was in there around inclusionary zoning, and we just want to, of course, I think you'll all be aware that the city's planning division is currently exploring the feasibility of inclusionary zoning as an affordable housing tool. But we would point out, if you're considering this from a climate justice point of view, there's a challenge with inclusionary zoning in terms of providing deeply affordable housing. We know that that tool tends to provide slightly lower, more affordable housing, and really no ability for the municipality to require private sector housing to be built in a climate resilient manner. There was also reference made to passive house design, so we've acknowledged that there is some wonderful work happening already on that front. And I think fair to say we'll be seeing other equivalent forms of building construction that pay attention to climate resilience moving forward. And it's worth noting as well that the city is in the process of developing green building standards that we're hoping will have a positive impact moving forward on private sector developers where climate resilience is concerned. We also commented on the land value capture and donating land, acknowledging that council has taken steps requesting that Metrolinx allocate surplus LRT lands to affordable housing in the future. Also want to acknowledge the transit-oriented affordable housing lab that's underway through Social Innovation Canada with the city and many other member organizations at that table looking at how we can get mobility justice happening and the importance of seeing people having the opportunity to have safe, healthy, affordable, and climate-resilient housing within access of the LRT. The report also recommended a seat at the table for Cycle Hamilton, and acknowledging that need to hear that voice of active transportation. And we certainly agree with that, but you'll see from the report as well that as we walk through this notion of a climate justice framework, it really does demand more than that, more than just that addition, and it demands some reflection on what other voices need to be at the table to address climate justice effectively. There also is a recommendation to subsidize LRT fare prices for low-income individuals. This for us, again, is a climate justice, mobility justice issue. And in the report, we have acknowledged that the city will have control of fares and will receive proceeds from the LRT fare box, so certainly is in a position to make existing programs like the Fare Assist program work seamlessly across the LRT system as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Beatrice now. She's going to talk a little bit more about the climate justice framework. And what we did in the report was we tried to illustrate for you what a preliminary application of that climate justice framework to those climate adaptation and resilience recommendations from the City Lab report might look like. So over to you, Beatrice.
So good morning. Hopefully I'm going to get this right. All right. Let's press it again. Hang on a second. Point to the computer. There's only a few, so thank you very much. So really, the first step is we're asking ourselves, many of you have heard us talk about climate justice and the fact that we're working on a climate justice framework. I'm just going to pull up my notes here. Excuse me one second. Really, the first point is, what is climate justice? I apologize, I've lost track of my notes here. Okay, so as the City of Hamilton transitions to a healthy, vibrant, prosperous, zero carbon future, and we're responding to those calls, we hear a lot from councillors and from the community that there's a need to understand to move forward considering climate justice. So climate justice addresses not only the environmental aspects of the climate crisis, but it also addresses the social and economic dimensions, striving for an equitable and inclusive approach in the face of this challenge. Look at the next slide. So it's a framework. I really apologize. I'm kind of lost on my notes here. Yeah. The plan really is for a co-design of climate justice framework. So right now we're in the beginning stages of what that will look like. So we're working on a project charter, and the pieces are coming together for this framework. But one of the key pieces that we're working on is that it be built on 3 equity dimensions. So we've got recognitional equity, and that would ask who should be included as a stakeholder in climate action decisions, and whose needs should be prioritized based on identification of groups or communities who are most vulnerable. So we heard right now through James Kemp's presentation right there that there are considerations that are not included right now in a project such as LRT, where the accessibility needs of many people with disabilities are not being considered. So the reason we really need to recognize there are voices that we haven't really heard that are not at the table. Procedural equity also considers how municipal decisions are made and who is involved in these processes. And this type of equity ensures that the plans and actions within a municipality accurately reflect the needs and wants of the community. And then the third dimension is distributive equity, and that considers distribution of climate action, benefits and burdens. Who's been harmed, who will benefit, and we're trying to make sure that any project that comes, such as the LRT, a massive project like the LRT, where are those, who's going to benefit from those, and who's going to, prioritizing those, we're calling them frontline communities, who are most impacted. So we've got Indigenous communities, we have persons with disabilities, we have Black community members, there are many, seniors, there are people that are in this community, and those benefits, because of the fact that the climate crisis is least those groups of people are least responsible for causing climate crisis, and therefore should their needs and their aspirations should really be the main focus of any municipal climate-related project. So I'm just going to skip ahead here. I don't know where I am this time. I literally haven't been looking at the slides at all. Oh, great. Thank you so much for that. You've moved ahead. And this is sourced from Lazarus Munich, and it's actually through the David Suzuki Foundation. We're kind of basing our framework on these three dimensions of climate justice. So recognitional equity, procedural equity, and distributive equity. So can you please advance to the next slide? Thank you so much. And yeah, so through this applying the climate justice framework to the LRT, we had the opportunity to look at the report through the students, the City Labs semester resident students wrote in partnership with the Hamilton Community Benefit Network. And we were able then to really examine and be really specific about where are those three dimensions of equity, climate equity, where they're highlighted, and Lynda just went over where those pieces were and what needs to be added. So we're looking especially when applying these equity dimensions, we have to really recognize, again, the needs and opportunities. So looking at the historically marginalized groups and what are those opportunities to uplift, and how are those climate action benefits going to be distributed, again. So in terms of the LRT, are we going to, like, we're thinking about something like displacement, or thinking about housing that Lynda just covered. We have seen that housing is extremely important, affordable housing. How can we ensure that this actually happens? These are some of the questions that again, we need more voices around the table to kind of examine and make really meaningful recommendations. So, because I think that without those voices of frontline groups, and I know there's been great engagement, but the project has been delayed, and there's been a period of time where engagement hasn't happened. So we're hearing there needs to be those voices added to the group. So I'm just going to carry on here. I don't know what's next on my slide deck, but if you don't mind, thank you. So yes, here are the recommendations. I just touched on the fact that, first of all, we really do recommend that the city continue to apply climate justice lens, even though the climate justice framework is still being developed. But this is really an opportunity for our office as well to use this opportunity to as a showcase, as a case study, almost as a guinea pig kind of testing ground to make sure this is right. So, so that's the first piece, like to actually continue the application of the climate justice framework, a lens to this project. And then the second recommendation that the LRT subcommittee recruit additional non-voting community advisors to the LRT subcommittee. So this could range from, and of course LRT will be responsible, this subcommittee will be responsible for adding new members to this, but really to reflect the community from a climate justice point of view. So whether it be members from the Black community, members from the Indigenous community, to have a voice at that table. And from there, recommendations can be a lot more tailored to the needs and unique challenges of these groups, as we have heard from the first delegate, that those needs are not, there's no plan. So there's no concrete plan, and so therefore having those voices can really help form and create a plan. So I think that's it for me today. So thank you. And
thank you so much for that overview and the presentation. Subcommittee members, the speakers list is open, so if you could indicate. I see Michelle Diplock, Carl Andrus. Any others? Okay, so go ahead, Member Diplock.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm wondering if the concept of an intergenerational equity can also be added to the framework. So I think one of the challenges is Hamilton is seeing across our entire city a broad-based housing shortage of all types of housing that is impacting our community, with thousands of children moving out of the community into Brantford, Niagara, and further beyond. So the costs of the climate crisis need to be kind of broadly shared across be shared broadly across the tax base to respond. Otherwise, I think it could significantly exacerbate our social inequities between existing homeowners and young people and newcomers that are moving to the community. So I think if it's possible to include that in the framework, I guess that's a question about whether or not it can be. And
do you want to answer that, Lynda? As far as
I can start, but then Beatrice, you may want to add. Certainly, I think as we're developing this framework, the whole point is to acknowledge who are the groups who are being more impacted, and what kinds of considerations do we need to be integrating into the framework in the manner that it's applied. And I think we're realizing too, once we have a framework in place, it is going to be very context specific. So I think part of the process will be, Beatrice used the term co-design, and so the effort there will be to engage people who are impacted in various ways to help with designing the approach that would be used in a given situation. But Beatrice, I'll let you add.
No, for sure. I think that's the next stage for the climate justice framework development will be to host engagement meetings. So through trusted allies that will be hopefully included, at least for us, those workshops. We're reaching out already. We've reached out to a number of local groups, and they are community service providers and well-trusted allies, really. That's why this is the best word I can use in the community. So they can also do that engagement on behalf of the city. So even with the Hamilton Community Benefits Network, I know they have done a lot of engagement around, and they continue to do that engagement, but again, having more of those often groups of people may not feel safe to share their feelings or what their concerns are, their issues are. So if they are engaged with people that they know and trust, we're going to get a lot more of an exchange that's going to be authentic and actually be a meaningful, exchange. Yes, hopefully that answers your question. But I love the idea of that intergenerational aspect, which is something that definitely I haven't thought about. And well, again, with those new voices, and we'll hear a lot more about how this should be shaped moving forward.
amazing, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next, we have Member Andrus.
Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate your recommendation around additional members to the LRT subcommittee meeting. There are certainly a lot of voices that could be heard around this table from the community, so I really appreciate that. My question through the chair to you is, one of the sections in the student report talked about implementing climate adaptable public transit infrastructure. In your report back on it, I didn't see a mention of that. So my question might not be to you, it might be to Director Sheikh, is what steps is the City of Hamilton taking to look at additions to the project that might be over and above the scope that Metrolinx provides in terms of stations for us to perhaps choose, if this committee wishes, to create a more climate resilient or more climate adaptive? And you mentioned some of the small suggestions in your report around weather protection, additional wayfinding, bike connections, drinking fountains, and washrooms, some of which are not standard at all in Metrolinx delivery. So my question to staff is, once the conversations with Metrolinx are concluded, is there a wish list that for climate adaptation or through the climate justice lens that staff may be compiling to bring back to this committee for additional consideration over and above Metrolinx built form? Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you for the question. As you know, Metrolinx is leading the project, and especially the system infrastructure, which includes stops and LRT infrastructure, that will belong to Metrolinx all the time in ownership. But in my opinion, that once climate justice framework is developed, finalized, and I think that's a way where we can influence, or where we can recommend to Metrolinx certain requirement what we would like to see in the project, right? So according to the MOU, Metrolinx is required to oblige all of our standards. And once this one becomes a standard, then we will communicate to Metrolinx and we will try to make sure that our standards are being employed. But again, Metrolinx will remain the owner of LRT system infrastructure, and they will be the ultimate, the final authority in terms of what elements can go. But we can definitely recommend what comes from the framework.
Just a quick follow-up question through the chair. Just as a point of clarification, obviously it's a Metrolinx-based project, and Metrolinx is paying for 100% of the capital and lifecycle maintenance costs of the project. I guess my question was specifically, sometimes I've read in Metrolinx projects where cities have added additional infrastructure to projects over and above what Metrolinx is paying for. So my question is, more specifically, is there a wish list that's being gathered based on stuff that Metrolinx might not necessarily pay for, but could be adaptations we made to the system while construction is undergoing, when those adaptations would be their least expensive because the infrastructure is already being taken up? I know we're doing some upgrading to water mains, for example, through our own capital projects. So I guess I was wondering where once Metrolinx says, I'm sorry, but our standards for stations are not what your climate adaptation standards are. Is there a list being compiled of staff of wants or wishes or upgrades that could be considered to the project? Thank you.
Through the chair, as you know, Andres, that the system infrastructure will come later in procurement 2, which Metro says little too early. Right now we are focusing more on city infrastructure. And yes, there is established process which we are currently working with Metrolinx, that if we have to add certain infrastructure, not just underground, also surface infrastructure, and there is a process which we are currently working with Metrolinx, that how we can add those betterments on top of Metrolinx basic requirement, which is being currently developed with Metrolinx. And then that process, in my opinion, will also be applied to the package 2. And we will continue to come to the LRT subcommittee members if there is additional beyond what Metrolinx requirements are. If we have to add, then we have to bring that business case, and if city is able to fund that one, then there is a mechanism to add these infrastructure into Metrolinx procurement. But again, it will be subject to Metrolinx decision whether they would like to add into the scope or not. Right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers on the presentation? Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the presentation and the thoughtfulness put into it. If I could just try and tie the two questions together to make sure I understand what is about to unfold and its application. So Member Diplock asked about an intergenerational framework, which I'm very appreciative of her doing. The challenge, of course, is at present, we've already lost a number of younger people who wouldn't be able to participate perhaps in some of those discussions because they're already gone, and some of them may be still at an age where they're coming up. So just kind of bookmarking that as a principle as opposed to perhaps a practice, because they don't perhaps normally engage in some of the community groups that you may or may not be referring to. And then Member Andrus' point of how we can imprint or affect perhaps the built form. I'm leading to a question here is just so I understand the expectation that's forthcoming from your work. Is it the expectation that the climate equity lens will influence existing corporate policy that is guiding the work, say, of Director Sheikh, such as the Complete Streets guideline, that climate equity would sort of inform and overlay that? And or will it be a separate corporate policy in and of itself that could give some effect to what Member Andrus is speaking of and Member Diplock? I'm just trying to understand the road ahead. Thank you.
Okay, through the chair, maybe perhaps you can help me out with this after. But first of all, the idea really is that this be a guide staff can use when they are doing their projects that they can refer to, and hopefully become actually a policy that they can actually go, okay, every climate-related project will be using this climate justice framework as a point of a starting point. So ideally, I know many municipalities are just only beginning to include climate justice in their climate plans. So it's been a bit of a challenge to find municipalities that are actually doing that from the get-go. But I've found some in the US that are definitely San Diego. There are definitely municipalities and cities that are just using this as this is what we do. It's going to be standard. When you start your project, you're going to have an equity screening tool, matrix indicators. You're going to have a tracking method. You're going to have a way to show how this project will benefit community members and specific community members too. So getting more detailed, more specific. So I think, an engagement process, engagement plans, all this, I know it sounds like a lot. And for us, it's also, as we're learning more and more, but we have to start somewhere. And it's almost like climate action plans missed the boat by not including climate justice right from the get-go, and they're kind of catching up. So we're not the only municipality that this is. We're definitely not. It's an emerging kind of trend, I think, now that we're looking at climate justice from the beginning of any project. So I hope that helps a bit. I'm going to pass it to Director Lukasik. Maybe you can explain a bit more.
Thanks, Beatrice. Only to say this is really this is a framework to guide process. So, Councillor Wilson, you acknowledged the Complete Streets policy guidelines that we have in place as a for instance, and so the idea that we're pursuing here is to create this framework so that as we work as a municipality to implement climate action on the ground, we're paying attention to that climate justice framework, that process, so that we're ensuring that we're engaging the right community members in the conversations that need to happen. So one example, as we were working through this report, we were excited about, and I know it's on today's agenda, some of the additional sidewalk width, for lack of a better description, that's been secured for the project. There's a wonderful example of if you layer a climate justice framework on top of that project element, then you're wanting to make sure that you've got those voices at the table, whether it's someone who's got accessibility challenges, whether it's a senior, whether it's someone in that neighborhood who, needs to travel on foot from home to an LRT stop. It's that idea of engaging people in a process that we hope will be more effective in bringing all of the voices to the table that need to be heard. So again, those three pillars of equity are what come into play to help to make that happen.
Thank you. Through the chair, I really appreciate that. I don't wish to prolong the discussion, but I would like to go back to what Member Andrus was suggesting, and I'll just footnote my concern here. In any and all things, what cities are fundamentally going to have to do is change. And it is, I think, both for good governance and transparency, and what is always necessarily a tension in that change is that in having a framework and a policy, it enables elected representatives anyway to make the case for that change, to justify that change, to look at that budget allocation as an investment, because it necessarily upholds these public principles that make life better for more people. And that's kind of where I'm going, is something in which to ensure that we have those available when it comes to these opportunities, to these challenges, and to support us in our decision making. So I'll leave that. Thank you very much for your work.
Thank you. Any further questions? Second time, Member Andrus.
Just one last quick quick question, and that was around the engagement piece, not specifically around the climate, but as it relates to the Hamilton Light Rail project. As was mentioned in the presentation, both the City and Metrolinx have not done any fulsome community engagement on this project since prior to its cancellation, and through the Chair Director, she indicated that during Phase 2 there might be some opportunities for talking about when we get to the built form. So I'm just wondering through yourself, either director, what there might be in terms of an engagement strategy around the climate justice lens to the light rail transit as the developments become more public and the planning becomes more public, and we get a better sense of the design and build form. In the original environmental assessment, we had full charrettes of the designs of the streetscapes. Obviously, there's significant changes that are underway. So I just wanted to get a sense on when we might be looking at some re-engagement being done, especially if we're talking about a climate justice lens for this project. Thank you.
Through Chair, I will probably take on, and then I will let Director Lukasik. So I think it will be a combination, in my opinion. First of all, we have our own governance structure while delivering the LRT project. So we have internal governance where we have the core working team, where we have a steering committee, and Dr. Lukasik is part of our steering committee. And then we report to the LRT subcommittee like this one. So once the framework is established, right? So, and then we have that report from City Lab as well. So these are the things which we will continue to bring this information to the core working team, to Metrolinx, and then we have to report this to LRT steering committee, what we have, and if there are any issues which we can proactively address, then we can bring those information to the LRT subcommittee for the direction, right? So in my opinion, this would be a direction. It will be mostly will be going through the governance framework what we have on our, and it will be more better if we have that framework finalized, so that we have the policy or framework where we can let Metrolinx know that, you know, these are the established guideline principle we have through the framework which we would like to adopt to the LRT project. And then we will continuously monitor that one through that governance framework we have already established.
Thank you.
Okay, Director Lukasik.
Thank you. Through the chair, just want to add a little bit more to that as well, just from our perspective. So we'll certainly, it's the Office of Climate Change Initiatives to continue to work with our colleagues in the LRT office to talk about how we can, Beatrice and I have been talking about piloting, innovating here, trying to figure out and using the LRT project as a bit of a testing ground for the framework. So certainly we'll continue to talk about the opportunities to do that. And I think it's worth mentioning here now is Beatrice is ramping up to start to do more engagement. And we just talked the other day about the idea of, maybe working through HCB and another member organizations in the community to engage, some of the networks that you've built in the co-design process for the climate justice framework itself. So there are lots of possibilities, and I know Beatrice has already detailed and shared with us a lot of her vision for how all of this will unfold. So I think we'd be really excited to come back and continue to share as that work unfolds, as it applies to LRT, but also more broadly.
Actually, I just wanted to share through the chair that as well, we have a new climate change advisory committee, and I have heard from one of the co-chairs that one of the working groups will be on climate justice. So I think that's going to be also helpful for our case. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay. Good. If Councillor Crutch, you could take the chair for a second. I have one follow-up question on the recommendation. So recommendation B through you is to recruit additional non-voting advisors. And then I was going to ask about whether or not the Climate Change Advisory Committee was looking at ways to intersect on this issue. So could you speak a little bit more about the working group and how you see that work potentially informing this one? And then my secondary question procedurally as chair is, what would it look like in terms of timeline to enact recommendation B, should it be approved by subcommittee today? So first over to you and then over to clerks.
Okay, so for the chair, we have only had one meeting of the Climate Change Advisory Committee, but there seems to be very much energy around that climate justice working group. So, as I said, I just got my first email from the co-chair, Ian Brozak, and he was expressing that he's going to be sending more information to the members for those who want to be participating in that. We will likely, I believe, they will have to develop a plan and figure out what they actually want to, what are the opportunities. So it's very, I'm sorry, it's very vague right now, but I'm sure we're going to have better answers for you at the next presentation.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Through you, Chair, the second question was a procedural one. So timeline for recruitment, should committee approve recommendation B?
Through the chair, I can start.
Okay.
And actually, clerks may want to weigh in too on this. We did take a look at your terms of reference, and it does appear that, as committee members, you're empowered to add more non-voting advisors, but maybe I should be deferring to clerks in terms of their interpretation of the terms. So.
Yeah, the terms of reference state that you can have any non-voting advisors around the table that you'd like, so that would be up to the committee.
Thank you for that. Okay.
Yeah, just to clarify, it might help. The selection committee process would have to be invoked to do so. Like, what happens with that? Maybe that's the other part of your question, is how that actually operates. Like, how do we get non-voting members here?
The non-voting members were appointed by the committee. They did not go through the selection committee process.
I introduced that wrinkle for our discussion. Councillor Han, do you have anything else to say about that?
Yeah, the puzzled look on my face. Okay, so then through you, the makeup of this LRT subcommittee, non-voting members, was through a selection process by this committee and not through the city's formal selection committee process?
I'd have to research that, but I believe so.
Okay. So then the final question on this, if recommendation B is approved by subcommittee and then ratified through the standing committee and then council, I guess somewhere along that line of finalizing and ratifying the decision, if we could get some clarity around the process, that would be beneficial before it gets to a standing committee.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, taking back the chair. No further questions on the presentation. Thank you both so much. And you're relieved back to seats. Okay, if I could please get a mover and seconder to receive the presentation first. Moved by Councillor Crutch, seconded by Councillor Kassar. We've already had a thorough discussion on the presentation, so it's before committee for a vote. And that carries on to the report then. May I have a mover and seconder for the report? Councillor Maureen Wilson, seconded by Councillor Huang. You have a question on the report? Yep, this is the right time. So anybody has questions on the details of the report, please indicate so we can add you to the speakers list. First up is Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Thank you. Through the chair, on the report, which were my question, was around the recommendation. B, and I'll read it aloud in case anybody's following publicly and doesn't have it in front of them, that the LRT subcommittee recruit additional non-voting community advisors to the LRT subcommittee table to ensure that the subcommittee's composition reflects the community from a climate justice point of view. Appreciate the report and the recommendation. That is a lot in B, because it does raise questions that have been, some of which have been flagged here, including my understanding is that this subcommittee's membership was declared prior to 2018, so many moons ago in terms of how that was done. And that begs the question of who. I know I thought the report referenced the cycling committee as one possibility, We now have a climate advisory committee. So if I could, through the chair to Director Lukasik, Director Sheikh, and or the clerk, would we require a different report on the possibility of how that could be constituted or how that would be done, maybe further to the issues that were flagged during the presentation? I was holding my question on that.
I am unsure.
Directors, have anything to add?
Through the chair, if this is a direction, we can probably bring another report providing what specific membership we would like to add to the LRT subcommittee, and it will be up to LRT subcommittee to approve.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. And just appreciating, I think what was implied also from the presentation is that the LRT subcommittee, if its membership was to change, it's not intended to be an exhaustive thing. The questions were asked about subsequent consultation. I believe Beatrice talked about they'll be thinking and talking about outreach along the way. So I do think, just for transparency and structure, that this committee needs to give some thought to how to, once it's passed, assuming, how to activate that. So I think we need further, if the recommendation passes, we need to have a further discussion on how to activate that and some intentionality around it through the chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I think perhaps we might want to consider a slight amendment to recommendation B, given that there is some process clarity that's needed. And the directors have mentioned that they could bring back information. Clerk has mentioned that they could bring back information. So maybe we make a slight amendment to B to say that staff report back on a process to enable the LRT subcommittee to recruit additional non-voting, etc. Would that satisfy the discussion right now around committee? Okay. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I thought I heard Dr. Lukasik said they looked into the terms of reference and there is a capacity. It's not my issue. It's, if I take Dr. Lukasik, she's done the work. She says it is within the will. It is within the capacity of this thing. It's the how. Mm-hmm. So it's not can, it's how. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, reporting back on a process to enable, right? It's the how. So I guess the conversation is still available to the subcommittee. Do we want to refer that process? Do we want to inform some of that process building now? Or would we like to delegate that to staff to bring back a report on with recommendations? Member Andrus and then Member Crutch, or Councillor Crutch.
Regardless of the direction through the chair that the voting members of this committee take, I think it is important, and what we did here today is that the City of Hamilton already has a bunch of advisory committees that fill these roles. So maybe through the chair, finding a way to empower them to be more part of some of the processes that happen at this LRT subcommittee may be something that the voting members and staff want to consider. We've heard from, like I said, there's a climate change subcommittee. We have all kinds of these subcommittees that are, I should say, advisory committees that have been established through the City of Hamilton. So perhaps maybe empowering them to be more part of the LRT subcommittee in some way may be something that's worth considering. Thank you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Councillor Crutch?
Yeah, I'm happy to move the suggestion amendment you're trying to get happening here, which is just to enable the process for us to do this. So there could be all kinds of folks. It could be the climate change advisory committee that could be have one of the co-chairs or both appointed to sit here. It could be Environment Hamilton. Like, we could go on, right? But we don't have a process right now that people feel confident about in the room today that we know will work to do that. So great. I think your amendment achieves that staff will come back and they'll report on how we're going to do that, what makes sense to do. That's, I think, what you're saying. I'm happy to move that if that will get this motion to happen.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then Councillor Huang is indicating seconding the amendment. So clerk, are you clear on the language? Sure, thank you. Thank you. Much more accessible. That staff report back on enabling the process to recruit. Sorry, that staff report back on the process to enable. Recruitment of additional. Okay. Mover and seconder are good with that. Any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, it is before committee to vote then on the amendment. Huang. And that carries. And now on the report recommendations as amended. Mover and Councillor Huang, seconder and Councillor Kassar. Thank you. Perfect. You already have your mover and seconder. Any further discussion on the recommendations and the report? Seeing none, time to vote. Thank you. That carries. Okay.